The galaxy had forgotten humanity. Once, they had been the shining beacon of advancement and power, a race that spanned the stars, building empires and forging alliances with other species. But that was long ago. Now, humanity's existence had dwindled to a scattered few, their once great fleets reduced to whispers in the dark corners of the galaxy. Empires fell, star systems crumbled, and humanity was forced to retreat to the farthest reaches of space, lost to history, surviving only in the hearts of those few who still remembered the Earth. The first sign of humanity's return came not in the form of a declaration, but a rumor. A ghost ship, a fleet of warships, ancient and terrifying, reappearing out of the deepest sectors of space, where the galaxy's forgotten sectors and black holes swallowed light itself. These ships had been lost, presumed destroyed in the final wars, but now they had reemerged. The prodigals, they called them, a fleet no one believed still existed. At the helm of the fleet was Commander Marlowe, a name that stirred fear in the hearts of those who had heard it. He was a figure of legend, his face known across the galaxy from tales told by survivors of the final human wars. Some said he was a madman, others that he was a genius. His legend was as fractured as humanity itself, full of myth and contradictions, but one thing was certain: he was unstoppable. And now, with his return, humanity's future was about to change. The prodigals appeared without warning. Their warships, massive, imposing structures, emerged from a nebula like a storm from the dark. These ships were relics of a bygone age, ships built by human hands long before they had been abandoned. Yet despite their age, they were as deadly as ever, their hulls armored with forgotten technologies that defied the understanding of even the most advanced alien species. To the scattered remnants of humanity, it was like the gods had returned. Commander Marlowe's message was simple, broadcast to every human settlement, every rogue colony, and every military outpost. The time has come to unite. The time has come to rise. For the survivors of humanity, the response was not one of celebration, but of uncertainty. Generations had passed since the last great wars, and each colony, each faction of human forces, had gone their own way. Many had long given up hope that humanity could ever be united again, that the fractured remnants of their once proud species could ever find common ground. Old wounds ran deep, betrayals, failures, and losses that time had not healed. Could they really trust Marlowe? Could they unite again, after everything that had happened? But Marlowe didn't give them a choice. His first move was swift, decisive, and brutal. He struck at the heart of one of humanity's last remaining military strongholds, a rogue warlord's fortress on the edge of the galaxy. The warlord, once a general in the old human fleet, had carved out his own domain, ruling with an iron fist and scorning any notion of unification. Marlowe's fleet descended on the fortress in a sudden, overwhelming assault, and within hours, the warlord was dead, his forces either crushed or brought to heel. The message was clear: unity or annihilation. In the wake of this victory, Marlowe's forces continued their campaign across the galaxy, systematically dismantling those who refused to join the cause. But it wasn't just his military victories that turned the tide. It was his presence, his unyielding vision. He was not just a commander. He was a symbol. The lost human armies, scattered and fractured, saw in him a spark of the old glory that had once been humanity's hallmark. They saw the possibility of a future, of a united front. It wasn't easy. Some resisted, some fought. But one by one, the fractured pieces of humanity's military might were drawn back into Marlowe's fold. Yet, as the prodigals marched across the galaxy, Marlowe knew the truth. This was only the beginning. The forces that had once shattered humanity were still out there, watching, waiting. And soon, they would know what it meant to face a united humanity once again. The echoes of humanity's past were about to become the roar of their future. Commander Marlowe's return to the galaxy was not just the reawakening of humanity's fighting spirit. It was the spark that ignited a chain of events that would lead to both salvation and destruction. As Marlowe's warships cruised through space, the message he sent out resonated across the galaxy, striking a chord in the hearts of every human survivor. His words were clear: unite or perish. The galaxy had not seen a true human force in centuries, and now one was rising from the ashes, challenging everything that the universe had come to believe about the human race. But despite the aura of invincibility surrounding Marlowe and his legendary fleet, the path to unification was far from smooth. Humanity's factions were scattered across the galaxy, each struggling to survive in a world that had long forgotten them. Some were ruled by warlords, ruthless leaders who had carved out domains for themselves, establishing kingdoms based on fear and bloodshed. Others had become self-reliant colonies, isolated from the chaos around them, living under a fragile peace that came at the cost of constant vigilance. These forces had grown accustomed to their independence, their autonomy, and Marlowe knew that forcing them into alliance wouldn't be easy. Some would join willingly, eager for the strength of unity, but others would resist. And Marlowe had a plan for both. The first target was the warlord Zorath, a former admiral who had become one of the most feared leaders of the human resistance. Zorath controlled an entire sector of space, and his reputation was built on years of unrelenting battles, where he had crushed any and all who stood against him. He was a legend among the scattered human remnants, a symbol of the old ways: conquer or be conquered. Zorath, however, did not believe in Marlowe's dream of unity. The warlord had spent years building his power and believed that Earth's forces had been weak and decadent in their heyday. He didn't trust anyone who preached peace. But Marlowe wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something greater. He had studied Zorath's movements, and in an unprecedented move, Marlowe struck first, a surprise raid on one of Zorath's heavily fortified strongholds. His warships came out of nowhere, cloaked in deep space shadows, their advanced stealth technology making them invisible to the enemy. Zorath's forces were caught off guard, and within hours, the fortress fell. Yet this wasn't a battle for survival, it was a message. Marlowe didn't simply destroy Zorath's empire. He offered him a choice. Standing in front of the warlord, surrounded by the wreckage of his forces, Marlowe offered a single ultimatum: join us, or watch as your people are slaughtered. The fire in Zorath's eyes was as fierce as ever, but there was a glimmer of doubt. Marlowe's forces had just done what no one thought possible: defeat a legendary warlord in his own domain with almost no casualties. Zorath's response was not immediate. He had his pride, his army, and his kingdom to protect. But he was no fool. He had seen firsthand what a united humanity could accomplish. Reluctantly, he swore the Crimson Covenant, vowing to lay down his arms in exchange for a place in the new alliance. The victory was significant. Marlowe had now gained the allegiance of one of the most powerful factions in the galaxy, but it came at a cost. Zorath was not the only leader who had resisted the idea of a united human front. Throughout the galaxy, Marlowe's tactics were beginning to work, but they also earned him enemies. As Marlowe and his forces pressed on, the galaxy watched with bated breath. The stakes were higher than ever. Some factions came to Marlowe's side willingly, eager to follow the man who had shown them that humanity could stand tall once again. Others, however, began to rally against him, refusing to bow to what they saw as the will of a dictator. Rumors swirled about secret factions plotting to stop Marlowe's rise, and whispers of ancient betrayals reached his ears. Yet, the drive for unity pushed Marlowe forward. He knew there was no turning back now. Every victory, every new ally, brought him closer to the impossible task of uniting the fractured remnants of humanity, and he would stop at nothing to see it through. The Crimson Covenant was gaining momentum, but the true test was still to come. The galaxy, once indifferent to the fate of humanity, was now on the brink of witnessing a revolution. The lost armies of Earth were no longer a memory. They were a force, and their leader, Commander Marlowe, was determined to ensure that no one would ever forget who they were again. The momentum Marlowe had gained was undeniable, but it was not enough to guarantee the future of his grand vision. As his fleet continued its march across the galaxy, the remnants of humanity's fractured forces slowly began to rally behind him. The Crimson Covenant, that sacred blood oath uniting human factions, was gaining significance with every battle and victory. Yet beneath the surface, not all was as it seemed. Uniting the lost armies was no small feat. Humanity had been divided for too long, and trust was a currency few could afford. Marlowe's first true test of leadership came when he sought to unite two of the most powerful factions. The Reclaimer Brotherhood, a nomadic group of tech scavengers, and the Volcaran Legion, a brutal mercenary force that had spent decades fighting for whoever paid the highest price. The two factions had long been enemies, with the Brotherhood valuing their freedom and technological prowess, while the Volcaran Legion believed in mercenary honor, an honor that didn't extend to alliances with anyone they saw as weak. The stage was set for an explosive confrontation. Marlowe knew that he had to act swiftly and decisively before the situation devolved into open conflict. He couldn't afford infighting. Humanity's enemies were growing stronger every day, and the Xanthari threat was still looming, unspoken but always present. If he failed to unite these factions, his dream of a united humanity would crumble before it ever reached its apex. In a bold move, Marlowe called for a meeting between the two factions, arranging it on the neutral ground of a desolate, abandoned space station in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The tension in the air was palpable as the leaders of the Brotherhood and the Legion arrived, each with their personal guards and entourages. Marlowe's warships were parked in orbit, ready for a swift intervention if things went south, but his focus was clear: diplomacy first, violence only if absolutely necessary. The Brotherhood was led by Presta, a shrewd and calculating commander known for her expertise in scavenging ancient technologies. The Volcaran Legion was under the command of General Relak, a grizzled veteran with a reputation for ruthlessness in battle. Both had seen their fair share of destruction and loss, and neither trusted Marlowe or his vision of unity. Humanity, Marlowe began, his voice strong and unwavering as he addressed the gathered leaders, has survived against impossible odds. But we cannot survive alone. If we continue to fight amongst ourselves, we will fall. The Xanthari are coming, and if we do not stand united, we will be wiped from the galaxy's history. You have been leaders in your own right, but now is the time to be leaders of something greater. Together, we will build a future. The words seemed to hang in the air, met with silence at first. The Brotherhood looked skeptical, their fingers itching for their weapons, while the Volcaran Legion stood tall but stoic, unwilling to show their true feelings. Presta was the first to speak. "What makes you think we can trust you, Marlowe? You speak of unity, but what will we gain from this alliance? Power? A place at your table? Or will we be nothing more than pawns in your quest for control?" General Relak crossed his arms, his face unreadable. "You ask for our loyalty, Marlowe. But what do you offer us in return? An alliance is only worth the price we're paid to join it." Marlowe didn't flinch. He had expected such responses. It wasn't enough to offer empty promises. He had to prove that unity was not just about power, but about survival. "Power is fleeting," he said calmly. "What we offer is survival. The Xanthari will destroy us all if we do not fight together. You don't need to like me, and you don't need to trust me, at least not yet. But you do need to trust that this is our last chance. If we don't stand together, we will be wiped out. Your people, your legacies, your way of life will be erased." The room fell silent again. It was clear that both factions were considering his words, but the weight of their decision was not lost on anyone. Then Marlowe made his move. "I propose a demonstration," he said. "A test. I will fight for your honor, for your trust. But first, I will take you to a place where you can see what happens when humanity is not united." Without waiting for an answer, Marlowe led them to a nearby planet, one that had recently fallen to a small but deadly alien faction known as the Krovi. The planet had once been a thriving human colony, but it was now a desolate wasteland, its people slaughtered in the streets. The Krovi were merciless. their forces overwhelming, and they had been raiding human territories for months. Marlowe's fleet arrived in a blaze of fire, catching the Krovi off guard. The battle was swift and decisive, with Marlowe's forces striking deep into enemy lines. His strategy was simple but effective, a focused strike aimed at the heart of the Krovi's command center. Within hours, the Krovi were routed, their forces scattered and broken. When the battle ended, Marlowe addressed Presta and Raylak, standing among the ruins of the human colony. "This," he said softly, "is the price of division. This could be us if we don't unite. But together, we can make sure that the Krovi, and anyone else who dares threaten humanity, never again sets foot on our worlds." The words hit home. The silence that followed was filled with understanding, a realization that this wasn't just about alliances. It was about survival, about the future of humanity itself. By the end of the day, both Presta and Raylak swore their allegiance to the Crimson Covenant, pledging their forces to Marlowe's cause. The first true spark of unity had been ignited. But Marlowe knew this was only the beginning. The real battles, against both the galaxy's enemies and the fractured loyalties of humanity itself, were just beginning. And so, the alliance of humanity's lost armies began, one step at a time. The first spark had been lit, but it would take all of Marlowe's will and cunning to fan that spark into a blazing fire that could consume the galaxy. The unification of the Reclaimer Brotherhood and the Volcaran Legion under the Crimson Covenant was a triumph for Marlowe, but it did not come without its consequences. The aftermath of the successful campaign against the Krovi sent ripples through the galaxy, stirring both admiration and fear. The factions that had once operated in isolated territories were now forced to contend with a new and powerful force that sought to reshape the galaxy. But with unity came inevitable friction. For Commander Marlowe, the next challenge was not just the external threat of the Zenthari or other alien invaders. It was the internal struggle of managing the newly forged alliance. The Brotherhood's scavengers, skilled but somewhat chaotic, and the Volcaran Legion, disciplined yet fiercely independent, had different ideologies, different ways of waging war, and different cultures. Though they had joined the Crimson Covenant out of necessity, trust was still a scarce commodity. Tensions between the two factions began to grow, as Presta and Raylak found it increasingly difficult to reconcile their people's differences. The Brotherhood's reliance on technology and stealth missions often clashed with the Legion's more direct, brutal style of combat. In the war room aboard the flagship Vanguard, the debates were growing heated, with each faction demanding more influence over the decisions being made. "We cannot fight wars with scavenged tech," General Raylak growled, his arms crossed tightly. "We need strong, direct action. Your Brotherhood has no concept of real combat, only cowardice and tricks." Presta's eyes narrowed as she leaned forward, her fingers tapping on the table. "And the Legion has no concept of survival. Blasting everything in sight won't win the long game. We can take out whole fleets with the right tools, tools that you wouldn't even understand." Marlowe stood at the head of the table, his presence a silent weight on the room. He could feel the strain in the air, the fissures beginning to form. If this continued, the fragile alliance would shatter, and humanity's hopes for survival would crumble with it. He knew what was at stake, and he had to act swiftly. But as the arguing continued, the communication channels pinged with urgent news. A fleet of unknown ships had entered human space. They were not the Zenthari, nor any of the previously encountered enemies. They were something different, more advanced, more dangerous. The message that accompanied their arrival was simple: surrender or face extinction. Marlowe's attention snapped back to the matter at hand. The new enemy was a coalition of alien races who had grown wary of humanity's resurgence. They were known as the Scorvian Collective, a ruthless alliance of species that had expanded rapidly across the galaxy, conquering worlds and enslaving entire populations. The Scorgians' arrival in human space was a direct challenge to Marlowe and his newly formed coalition. They could not afford to show weakness. "We face a greater threat than any we've ever known," Marlowe said, his voice cutting through the tension. "This is our moment to prove ourselves, to show the galaxy that humanity is not a scattered remnant, but a force to be reckoned with. Presta, Rylak, your forces must work together. If we do not, we will lose everything." Reluctantly, the two leaders nodded. But Marlowe could see the resentment still simmering beneath the surface. The real test was about to begin. The Vanguard led the charge against the Scorgian fleet. Marlowe's plan was simple: a full frontal assault to draw the enemy's attention, followed by a covert strike by the Brotherhood to sabotage their command ship. It was a strategy that demanded trust and coordination between the Brotherhood and the Legion, two factions that had never truly fought together. The battle began in earnest. The Scorgian ships were massive, sleek, and lethal, with weapons that tore through human ships like paper. The Vanguard took the brunt of the assault, its shields flickering as enemy fire rained down. The Legion's ships moved in close, engaging in brutal dogfights, while the Brotherhood deployed its hidden assets, smaller ships equipped with cloaking technology, to strike at weak points in the Scorgian lines. Despite the carnage, the battle was turning in humanity's favor. The Scorvians' forces, though superior in technology, were struggling to keep up with the ingenuity and unpredictability of human tactics. The Brotherhood's stealth missions wreaked havoc on the Scorgian command ships, while the Legion's brutal assaults broke the enemy's front lines. Yet, as the battle raged on, Marlowe's attention was diverted to an unexpected threat. A massive Scorvian dreadnought had broken through the human defenses and was now bearing down on the Vanguard. "All units, focus fire on the dreadnought." Marlowe's voice rang out over the comms. "Presta, we need your tech. Rylak, cover our flanks." For a moment, it seemed as though the battle would be lost. The Vanguard was buckling under the dreadnought's assault, its shields failing under the unrelenting barrage. But then, something unexpected happened. In a moment of clarity, the Brotherhood and Legion forces synchronized their attacks. Presta's ships slipped past the Scorgian defenses, delivering a crippling blow to the dreadnought's engines, while Rylak's forces held the enemy at bay, drawing the fire away from the Vanguard. The Scorgian dreadnought exploded in a violent burst of light, the shockwave rippling through the battlefield. Humanity had won, against impossible odds. But as the dust settled, it became clear that the cost of victory was high. The rift between the Brotherhood and the Legion was deeper than ever, and Marlowe knew that the battle for unity was far from over. The Scorvian collective had been defeated, but new challenges awaited, and the bonds between the factions would be tested in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. Humanity's future was secured for now, but the question remained: could it hold together long enough to survive what was coming next? The victory against the Scorvian collective was monumental. Humanity had proven that it could stand together against overwhelming odds, and for a brief moment there was hope. The shattered remains of the Scorvian fleet were scattered across space, and the surviving human factions celebrated their hard-won triumph. But the relief was short-lived. The battle had not only revealed the strength of humanity when united, it had also exposed the cracks within Marlowe's coalition, cracks that were now deepening with every passing day. Marlowe's forces had successfully driven the Scorvians out of human space, but the price of victory had been steep. The Brotherhood and the Legion had fought side by side, but there had been too many instances where trust was strained at the breaking point. The Brotherhood's dependence on stealth and technology had clashed with the Legion's more brutal, straightforward methods. While both sides had grudgingly respected each other's strengths during the battle, the undercurrent of resentment between Presta and Rylak was undeniable. In the aftermath of the battle, both factions withdrew to their own territories to lick their wounds. The fragile unity Marlowe had fought so hard to forge was on the brink of collapse. The Vanguard returned to the outer rim, its damaged hull a grim reminder of the cost of war. Inside the war room, Marlowe stood before a holographic map, his brow furrowed as he surveyed the scattered forces. Presta was the first to speak, her tone sharp. "We saved your Legion from annihilation, Rylak. But that doesn't mean I trust you. and it doesn't mean we should keep fighting your way. You almost got us killed today with your reckless tactics. We work smarter, not harder." Rylak's face tightened in response. "You talk about smarter, Presta, but there's a reason you've been hiding behind your tech and your tricks all these years. When the real battle comes, we'll need muscle, not just wires and gadgets." Marlowe's voice cut through the bickering. "Enough. This arguing won't get us anywhere." Both leaders fell silent, but the tension in the room was palpable. Marlowe could see it in their eyes. The lack of trust was eating away at them. The Brotherhood was used to independence and secrecy. They thrived on their ability to operate in the shadows, far from the prying eyes of the Legion's heavy-handed tactics. The Legion, in turn, had spent decades honing their strength, focusing on combat and dominance, with little patience for subtlety. Together, they formed a powerful fighting force, but Marlowe feared that they were on the verge of falling apart. "We don't have time for this," Marlowe said, his voice firm. "We've just beaten the Scorpions, but this is only the beginning. The Zenthari are still out there, and their invasion is imminent. If we can't put our differences aside, we'll be lost before we even face them." His words hung in the air, but they didn't have the desired effect. The fracture lines between the Brotherhood and the Legion were too deep. Marlowe knew the truth. Unity couldn't be forced. It had to be earned, and right now, neither side was willing to give an inch. The problem was not just between Presta and Rylak. Marlowe had learned that the real issue lay in the deep-rooted mistrust among all the factions of humanity. There were old wounds, scars that had never fully healed. The last great human wars had fractured the species beyond repair, and while the need for survival was a powerful motivator, it was not enough to heal centuries of betrayal, division, and conflict. Marlowe had always been a pragmatist. He knew that trust couldn't be built overnight, but he also knew that the Zenthari were getting closer. Their fleet was advancing, and if humanity was to survive, it would need every last ounce of strength. Every soldier, every ship, and every scrap of technology it could muster. But first, Marlowe had to deal with the internal strife that was threatening to destroy everything he had worked for. In a final attempt to salvage the situation, he decided to take a more personal approach. Instead of pushing the factions together through commands and force, he would visit the leaders of the Brotherhood and the Legion, face to face. Perhaps by confronting their leaders directly, he could convince them that unity was their only option. He started with Presta. The leader of the Brotherhood was a formidable strategist, but she was also proud and stubborn. Marlowe knew that her loyalty could not be taken for granted. He traveled to her flagship, the Eagle's Talon, a sleek and formidable vessel orbiting a barren moon at the edge of human space. The moment he arrived, he was greeted with wary eyes and cool silence. Presta stood at the command center, arms crossed. Her eyes were dark, her expression unreadable. "Presta," Marlowe said, his voice calm but insistent, "we need to end this hostility. The Scorpions are gone, but the Zenthari are coming. The next battle will be our last if we don't stand together." Presta turned to him, her gaze hard. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't see the bigger picture? But how can we trust the Legion when they've been nothing but a hammer to our scalpel for years? What happens when they decide they want more power than we can give them?" Marlowe sighed, stepping closer. "I'm asking you to trust me, Presta. Trust that we can build something stronger than this. Humanity's future depends on it." She was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. But in her eyes, Marlowe could see a flicker of something, a crack in the armor. And in that moment, he knew that the battle for unity was far from over, but it was a battle he was willing to fight, even if it meant taking on the most difficult task of all, rebuilding the broken trust between humanity's fractured armies. But time was running out. The Zenthari were coming, and they would not wait for humanity to figure itself out. Marlowe left Presta's flagship with a lingering sense of uncertainty. Though the conversation had been tense, there was a flicker of hope. Presta had listened, even if only briefly. And for now, that was enough. The true test lay in what would come next, whether the Brotherhood and the Legion could set aside their distrust and work together, or whether their petty divisions would tear them apart before they could confront the real enemy. Marlowe didn't have time to dwell on the lingering tension. The Zenthari threat was no longer a distant possibility. It was an imminent reality. His spies had confirmed that the Zenthari fleet had entered the Outer Rim, preparing for an all-out invasion. In a matter of days, they would be upon humanity's remaining colonies, and unless humanity could forge a united front, they would fall like every other species that had crossed the Zenthari in the past. His next move was crucial. If Presta had been wary of the Legion, then Rylak was just as suspicious of the Brotherhood's methods. Marlowe knew he had to meet with the general next and convince him that the cost of continuing this rivalry would be their ultimate destruction. Rylak's ship, the Hammer of War, was stationed on the border of human space, preparing its forces for the inevitable battle with the Zenthari. The ship was a fortress of steel, its hull scarred by countless campaigns, a testament to the Valkyrian Legion's unyielding strength. Marlowe boarded the ship alone, leaving his guard behind. He knew this had to be personal if there was any chance of success. Rylak's war room was as imposing as his reputation. It was a cold, dark place, filled with the scent of recycled air and the hum of active machinery. The general stood at the far end of the room, looking out over a holographic display of the Zenthari fleet's trajectory. "Did you think I wouldn't know you were coming?" Rylak's gravelly voice echoed through the room. "I've been in this game too long to trust words alone." "I didn't come to beg," Marlowe replied, stepping into the room. "I came to remind you what we're fighting for. Humanity's survival. The Zenthari won't wait for us to sort out our differences. If we don't join forces, they'll wipe us out before we even have a chance to fight." Rylak turned slowly, his steely eyes studying Marlowe. "And you think you can force me to put my faith in the Brotherhood? They're not soldiers. They're scavengers." Marlowe didn't flinch. "No, they're not. But they've got something that the Legion doesn't. They've got the tech, the knowledge, the edge we need. I'm not asking you to like them, Rylak. I'm asking you to see the bigger picture. The Zenthari are more than we've ever faced. They'll wipe out anyone who doesn't stand united." The general's expression was unreadable. "The Brotherhood's methods may be effective, but they don't fight like we do. They don't understand the true cost of war. I've watched men die in ways you can't imagine, Marlowe. The Legion doesn't fight for technology. It fights for honor." Marlowe stepped forward, closer to Rylak, locking eyes with him. "And that honor will get us killed if we don't adapt. Look, I don't want to change who you are or how you fight. But I need your strength, your experience. The Brotherhood needs your leadership just as much as you need theirs. We're human, Rylak. If we don't come together now, we won't have a future to protect." Rylak was silent for a moment, his jaw clenched. "I don't trust you," he muttered. "I don't trust anyone who thinks we can make it through this by playing nice. But I'll give you this, Marlowe. I'll give you one chance to prove that you're right, that we have something to fight for, beyond ourselves." Marlowe's heart surged with relief. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was progress. "That's all I need. Together, we'll crush the Zenthari." Rylak gave a curt nod, turning back to the hologram. "We've got one shot at this. Don't waste it." With that, Marlowe left the Hammer of War, his steps lighter than they had been in days. There was still a long road ahead, and the hard work was far from over, but the tides were turning. The Valkyrian Legion and the Brotherhood had agreed, at least temporarily, to unite their forces. Now they would have to find a way to operate together, to coordinate strategies and tactics, all while facing an enemy more powerful than anything they had encountered before. The next day, Marlowe called for a joint strategy meeting. The room was filled with leaders from both factions, their faces tense, but there was an air of determination in the room. The old divisions were still there, but the specter of the Zenthari loomed larger than any personal feud. As the meeting began, Presta and Rylak were at the front, standing beside Marlowe. There was no word of protest, no challenge to his authority. Both factions had finally understood that this was no longer about pride or territory. It was about survival. And if they were to stand a chance against the Zenthari, they would have to face the truth. Unity was their only hope. Marlowe addressed the room, his voice resolute. "This is the moment we've been preparing for. The Zenthari are coming, and we will meet them with everything we've got. Together, we are humanity's last hope. Let's make it count." The room was silent for a moment. Then slowly, the murmurs of agreement began to ripple through the gathering. The Crimson Covenant, fragile as it was, had endured. And now, humanity's fractured armies would stand united in the face of the greatest threat they had ever known. But Marlowe knew one truth. This unity had come at a price, and it was a price they would have to pay, whether they were ready or not. The united forces of the Brotherhood and the Volcaran Legion gathered in the heart of human space, ready to face the looming Zenthari invasion. Marlowe stood at the helm of the vanguard, his eyes fixed on the vast expanse of stars outside. The last week had been a whirlwind of strategizing, reconciling differences, and rallying troops. The fractures between the factions hadn't vanished entirely, but the promise of a common enemy had hardened their resolve. The plan was simple: strike first and hit hard. The Zenthari fleet was massive, its technology far beyond anything humanity had ever faced, but the Zenthari were not invincible. Their fleets relied on precise coordination and overwhelming firepower. If humanity could break their formation and create chaos, they might have a chance. Presta's Brotherhood led the first wave. Their specialized stealth ships moved ahead, slipping through the enemy sensors like ghosts, planting sabotage devices on key Zenthari vessels. The Legion would follow, charging into the fray with their brutal, straightforward tactics. Marlowe's role was to coordinate both sides and strike with surgical precision when the time was right. The night before the assault, Marlowe met with both Presta and Raylac. The tension between the two leaders was still palpable, but there was a reluctant understanding now. They had their roles to play in this war, and for the moment, they were willing to let go of their personal grudges. "Tomorrow, we fight together," Marlowe said, looking at each of them in turn. "I don't care who leads the charge or who gets the glory. We win or we die, and it will be because we put everything aside and acted as one. Are we clear?" Presta and Raylac exchanged a long look, then nodded in unison. It was a moment of rare harmony, a fragile understanding born out of necessity. But Marlowe knew that trust was a long road, and this was only the first step. The next day, the battle began. The Zenthari fleet, unaware of the human force's movements, was caught off guard by the sudden assault. Brotherhood ships darted in and out of the enemy's lines, causing chaos with targeted strikes on their critical infrastructure. It was a beautiful thing to watch, human ingenuity at its finest, outwitting a technologically superior enemy. The Zenthari struggled to adapt, their communication networks disrupted, their coordinated tactics unraveling. Then, as planned, the Legion entered the battlefield. Waves of Volcaran ships surged forward, cutting through the Zenthari's weakened lines with relentless ferocity. Rylac's forces moved like a storm, overwhelming enemy positions with sheer power and unrelenting speed. The Zenthari fleet, staggered by the sudden onslaught, began to crumble under the weight of the combined human forces. But Marlowe knew it wouldn't be enough. The real challenge lay in the Zenthari flagship, the Gorath, a massive, heavily fortified vessel that served as the heart of the invasion force. If humanity could destroy it, the rest of the fleet would collapse. Marlowe's eyes narrowed as he watched the battle unfold. The Gorath loomed large on the battlefield, its massive weapons ripping apart anything that came too close. He turned to Presta. "We need to hit the Gorath now. Your ships can get in close, disrupt their shields, and give Raylac's fleet the opening they need." Presta didn't hesitate. "We'll move in." She turned to her commanders, issuing orders swiftly. The Brotherhood ships vanished into the shadows, slipping toward the Zenthari flagship with precision. Meanwhile, Rylac's forces pressed harder on the Zenthari's flanks, driving them back and breaking their formation. The tide of battle was slowly turning, but the Gorath was still a formidable presence, blocking their way. Marlowe's pulse quickened as the seconds ticked by. This was it, the moment they had been fighting for. "Now, Presta," Marlowe shouted over the comms. "Now or never." The Brotherhood ships emerged from their cloaking fields, and within moments they began targeting the Gorath's shields. The massive vessel's defenses flickered under the concentrated barrage, its shields beginning to fail. The Zenthari flagship's weapons turned to target the Brotherhood ships, but they were too fast, too elusive. Presta's ships danced around the Gorath, creating openings for Rylak's fleet to push through. Rylak barked orders, and the Legion surged forward. Their ships blasted through the gaps, hammering the Gorath with devastating volleys of fire. The flagship shuddered, massive explosions rippling through its hull. Marlowe could see the chaos unfolding from the bridge of the Vanguard, but he knew it wasn't over yet. The Zenthari weren't going to give up so easily. "All units, focus on the Gorath. We're not done until that ship is gone," Marlowe commanded. The final assault was brutal. The Gorath fought back with everything it had, its weapons flaring as it fired on everything that came within range. But the human forces were relentless. The Legion pressed on, each shot pushing the Gorath closer to its inevitable end. The Brotherhood's sabotage had crippled its systems, and now it was only a matter of time. With one final, coordinated blast from both the Legion and the Brotherhood, the Gorath's core ruptured, sending a massive explosion that rippled through the battlefield. The Zenthari flagship was no more. For a moment, the silence of the aftermath was deafening. Then, as if on cue, the Zenthari fleet began to retreat, their ships breaking formation and fleeing from the battlefield. Humanity had won. For now, the cost had been high. Ships were lost, and many soldiers had fallen in the fight. But as Marlowe watched the remnants of the Zenthari fleet scatter into the void, he allowed himself a brief moment of triumph. This victory was a testament to what humanity could achieve when united. However, Marlowe knew that this battle was just the beginning. The Zenthari would return, and next time, they would come in greater numbers, with even more deadly tactics. Humanity had won a crucial victory, but the true war was far from over. And in the aftermath of this battle, the fragile unity of the Brotherhood and the Volcaran Legion would face its greatest test yet. The victory over the Zenthari fleet was a moment of fleeting relief, a breath taken in the calm before the storm. Marlowe stood on the command deck of the Vanguard, looking out at the wreckage of the battlefield. The remnants of the Zenthari ships floated in space, twisted and burning, while the human forces regrouped, battered but victorious. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though the human race had turned the tide, that they had a chance to rebuild. But Marlowe knew better. The Zenthari would not be deterred by a single defeat. This was only the beginning, and the next wave would be fiercer, more relentless. The unity of the human factions, the Brotherhood and the Legion, had been forged in the fires of war, but it was a fragile thing. The question remained, could they maintain it when the true cost of the conflict became clear? "General, we're receiving a transmission from the High Council," the comms officer said, snapping Marlowe out of his thoughts. "Put it through," Marlowe ordered, his voice low but resolute. The face of Counselor Dahlia appeared on the screen, her expression grim. "Marlowe, the Zenthari are retreating, but they've already begun reassembling their forces. This was a temporary victory at best. Intelligence reports indicate their main fleet is still on course for the core systems." "Understood," Marlowe said, his voice steady despite the weight of the news. "We've only bought ourselves time. I need every resource we can muster. We need to prepare for their return. This time, we need to hit them before they reach the core." Dahlia's eyes narrowed. "You're asking for more than we can provide. The Brotherhood is already stretched thin, and the Legion's forces are suffering losses. We don't have the manpower to sustain another attack like this." "We don't have a choice," Marlowe replied. "The Zenthari won't stop. We can't wait for them to strike at the heart of humanity. We must strike now, before they regroup. There's a window of opportunity, and we have to seize it. The counselor hesitated, but only for a moment. I'll see what we can do. You have your resources, Marlowe. Make it count. The transmission cut out, leaving Marlowe with the weight of the decision. He knew that pushing his forces further would stretch them to the breaking point, but the alternative was far worse. Time was running out, and the Zenthari would not be merciful when they returned. He turned to face the assembled leaders of the Brotherhood and the Legion. Presta and Rylak stood at the front, their expressions unreadable but serious. The alliance had held thus far, but the strain was evident. Every loss, every new challenge, was a reminder of how fragile this unity truly was. We've won a battle, but the war is far from over, Marlowe began. The Zenthari will be back soon, and we need to prepare for their next assault. We have one shot at this. If we fail, there will be no second chances. Presta was the first to speak. You're asking us to risk everything again, Marlowe. We lost ships, men, and resources in the last battle. The Brotherhood has already given everything we have. And the Legion has blood just as much. Rylak countered, his voice heavy with the weight of his own losses. But we'll fight again, Marlowe. We'll fight because we have no other choice. This war is far from over, and I won't let my people go down without a fight. Marlowe nodded, grateful for Rylak's resolve. Good. We will use everything we have, all our strength, to hit the Zenthari where it hurts. This time, we strike before they can launch their next wave. We'll go straight to their core systems, cripple their fleets before they can launch their full-scale attack. The room fell into silence as the leaders considered the magnitude of the plan. Every instinct told them to prepare for a defensive fight, to fortify their systems, and regroup. But Marlowe knew that if humanity waited for the Zenthari to strike first, it would be too late. Finally, Presta spoke, her voice quiet but firm. We'll do it. We may not trust the Legion's methods, but we trust you, Marlowe. And we trust that humanity has no future if we don't fight with everything we've got. Rylak nodded, his grim expression softening slightly. The Legion stands with you. We'll make this work, Marlowe. But know this, if we fail, it won't be just one faction's loss. It will be everyone's loss. Marlowe looked out at the faces of those assembled in the war room. The unity of the Brotherhood and the Legion was a fragile thing, but it was the last hope humanity had. If they were to win this war, they had to put aside their differences and fight as one, not just for their survival, but for the future of humanity itself. The plan was set in motion. With the resources from the High Council, the combined forces of the Brotherhood and the Vulcaran Legion began their preparations for the final strike. The window of opportunity was closing, and the Zenthari would not wait forever. Marlowe stood on the command deck of the Vanguard, looking out at the stars. The final battle was ahead, and he could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. There would be no room for mistakes, no second chances. The Zenthari would be met with all the fury of humanity's united forces, and this time, Marlowe vowed, they would not be driven back. The war for humanity's future was about to reach its climax, and at the heart of it all, the fragile unity of the Crimson Covenant would either be humanity's salvation or its undoing.